How's it going, guys? This is Evan Pardue of Underhill Bonsai and also of the podcast show Little Things for Bonsai People. And welcome back to our video series that we do on YouTube here. And today I'm going to be doing a bonsai beginners episode, and we're going to be talking about different sizes of bonsai. So starting from the smallest all the way up to very, very large. But before I get into that, I do want to talk about a few things and answer a few questions. We have questions that came in from social media, either through TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, etc. I just want to answer those quick for you guys. There was some really great beginners questions on there. So we got a question from Miss MIS off of Instagram saying that they just got a juniper and they didn't give me the species or any other specifics about the tree, but they wanted information on how to get started and any advice on that, and what soil type was one of the things that they mentioned. So let's start with soil really quick. Soil is going to really depend on what state of development the tree is in. If it's an early piece of material, like it's raw, like it is not really a bonsai just yet, which when I say that, it looks like a bonsai. If it's a juniper, junipers are notorious for already kind of having that look, and I would say you'll know when it really has that quality of looking like an old tree whenever it's had the branches positioned in a particular way to show off the trunk and the mature branching and have the pads formed on the foliage. Then you'll have more of a pre-bonsai look, or you might even have more of a developed bonsai. So depending on where you are, if you're raw to pre-bonsai to specimen quality, the soil type's going to depend on where it's at in its development. So I usually say raw is usually just in garden soil, like pine bark, peat moss, stuff like that. Just organic stuff, just to get the root system really building and get a lot of healthy growth so that you can start working on the tree. Pre-bonsai trees go into a mix. For me, we put a little bit of pumice and lava into that garden soil just to introduce it when we do that first repot to get it prepared for its future bonsai pot. If it's a specimen quality tree, it's going to be in straight bonsai inorganic mix. So no more pine bark, no more peat moss, sand, or anything like that. And it's going to go into a permanent soil mix, lava, pumice, and even akadama, depending on how wet or dry your climate is. And then general guidelines for a juniper: keep it outside. Keep it watered at least once a day. Make sure it does not dry out. Depending on the species of juniper, it might want to dry out more than stay wet longer. It just depends on the species. Do more research on that. And when it starts to grow, don't forget to fertilize. So a question from TikTok. The name was Wayland1227. They were asking about starting bonsai on a budget. Any tips for a budget? So before I did this professionally, everything I did was on a budget with bonsai, so I can definitely relate to that. So what I would do is I would go to garden centers and go to the clearance aisle in the garden center, because those are the plants that are considered too ugly for landscaping, or they're a little overgrown, or they just don't really think that people will want them. They're out of season. And sometimes you'll get lucky. You'll find plants that are suitable for bonsai. Not everything that you find there will be suitable or will be attractive to you, but you might get a good price there. I used to do stuff like that. I call it scouring the landscape nurseries for bonsai material, or and it's not going to be the best case scenario because your root systems are going to be in poor condition. Typically, you're going to have some really weird things where if the tree or shrub or whatever it is has been there for long enough, they'll have twisted, knotted, really root-bound roots within that pot that are difficult to work with for a beginner. So that's one way. In my opinion, the best way is to find a tree that you really want to make into a bonsai, something you like. Get yourself a little bit of just like garden soil that has good drainage, add a little bit of sand to it, and take cuttings of your plant that you want to make into a bonsai. Now, when I was getting started, that was one of the things that if I was looking for a particular shrub or tree, I wanted the tree itself, because my goal was to eventually make stuff like this. And I can't make this from a cutting. I could, but not in my lifetime. This tree was much bigger, older we did take part in collecting this one. When this was found, and from a cutting, this is just a full-grown tree basically. So so to take a cutting means to do something like more of like a smaller size tree, and that will help you learn how to work with that material. But also, when you take a cutting, you can make your roots nice and even because you have full control. When you take a cutting, the roots come out kind of in a radial fashion depending on the species. Elm trees are terrible at it, but a lot of other species make pretty decent radial roots. And then when you pull that cutting up, it might have a root hanging down the bottom. You can cut that flat and leave the roots like this and put them out flat on that first repot. And from there, as long as you keep those roots where you want them, they will thicken and then you'll get a desirable base. And yes, that's one way to budget it because that's almost like free bonsai there, but you still need the soil and the pot to put it in. And then one day when you move it up to a larger tree, you'll need all the other things that you need, like nice pot, nice soil, tools to work with. So, but that's at least a good start. I always say on my podcast show, take cuttings of everything you have because you'll never know when you'll need them. And so our last question comes in from TikTok as well. It was a comment under a bald cypress video that we did. It was actually one of our more popular videos, so there was plenty of questions on there, but this one I get a lot. So Derek B is asking, do we have to grow bald cypresses in standing water or basins of water? And also, does that extra amount of moisture encourage root and knee growth? So this is a really big question here in Southeast Louisiana. I don't get it a lot outside of the Southeast, which is kind of surprising because it's just kind of like this general consensus that if you water your tree enough, the tree will get what it needs as far as water requirements. Whereas down here in Louisiana, we are so used to seeing the bald cypresses grow in the swamps. They call them swamp cypresses in other areas. They're the king of the swamp. They're the one tree that represents that environment. So there's an assumption made that they have to be in water. I've covered this in another video, but it's always great to go back and just kind of elaborate on it again. I don't personally grow my bald cypresses in standing water, especially whenever they are up to this level, because one, the pot that I put it in, I don't want to submerge my pot constantly because certain clay bodies and certain glazes don't look great when they sit in water for prolonged periods of time. They get staining, they absorb a lot of minerals, they start looking really grimy and just nasty. So every time I want to show that tree, I have to clean that pot off. And it makes the tree unbelievably heavy because when you're constantly waterlogged, I mean, this is already a heavy tree. I can move it. It would, honestly, we're gonna get into this later in this video. This is actually a four-hand tree, so two people can comfortably move this tree. It probably would be easier if it was a six-hand, it was three people, so we don't hurt our backs. But whenever the trees are heavier and they're completely waterlogged, that can cause some challenges. Also, whenever you put a bald cypress into a water basin and you give it that much more, like basically surface area within there for it to grow roots into, I've had bald cypresses grow roots down out the bottom of the container and then grow a mat of roots underneath. And when I go to take that tree out of the water to go show it in a local show, club show, or whatever type of show we do, now I have these roots that I have to cut off the bottom, and that might not be what the tree needs at that moment to have those roots cut back. And I personally these are personal experiences with bald cypresses at specimen level like this. I have about 8 of them at my house, and they're all in smaller pots. Some of them are in really shallow pots. I water them once a day, and then if it was a really hot, dry day, I water them twice. So I water them in the evening as well, and they do just fine. They never wilt, they never turn brown, crazy colors. They always look like this. They look beautiful. So the answer is you don't. Can you? Yes, it's not required. Now, does all that extra moisture encourage more root growth? Well, yeah, because you're constantly feeding the tree water. They're heavy drinkers, but then you're constantly getting more and more growth that you can't control by metering water to the tree. So if you overfeed, overwater, you're gonna get abundance amount of growth on top, and you're constantly being trimming it. You're never gonna get fine growth, you're always gonna get coarse growth, and we wanna slow it down and get smaller growth on this bigger tree, because that's the goal in bonsai, is to make it that scalability. And then the last part with knees, A lot of people love asking about knees. There's a lot of different ways that we get knees on bald cypresses. My best theory and advice on that, that it's another personal experience thing, growing them for several years now, over a decade of growing bald cypresses. I only see knees on old bonsai trees. So it has to be, like for instance, the trunk on this tree, when it was collected, it was at least 20 years old. It has a circumference, or let's just say visual, side to side here. It has a visual trunk mass that's roughly about 22 inches, somewhere in here, 24 inches, goes much wider obviously when the root spread comes out. And then also genetics. Some bald cypresses, because they're all genetically different, are better at making knees. So age, size, and time is really, and genetics. But those things really will help, and then you just have to wait. And then maybe one day one will pop out of the soil, and then there you go. Congratulations. But you know, that's not the most important thing to me on bald cypresses, to be honest. So thank you for the questions, guys. But one more thing for beginners, for more generalized beginner stuff, I do want to promote Jonas Dupuy's new book. So his first book that he wrote for bonsai was called Little Book of Bonsai. It was a very good seller. We sold a lot of them here at the nursery. And if you guys go over to Little Things for Bonsai People, one of my most recent episodes that will come out around the same time this video will, I'm interviewing Jonas Dupuy, and we're talking about the Essential Bonsai book, techniques for creating beautiful trees. And so this has a lot of great beginner material in here. Little Book of Bonsai was the ultimate, in my opinion, the ultimate beginner book. This is like part 2, or the next book in the saga, in my opinion, because he goes into more advanced, nuanced things about bonsai here, but there's still a lot of really great resources for beginners, and also beautiful images of beautiful trees. Jonas has really great trees, and a lot of his friends have great trees. So if anything, if you don't ever read it, you can thumb through it and look at pretty pictures. So yeah, go over to Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and you can go listen to me and Jonas on Little Things for Bonsai People. Okay guys, welcome out to the bonsai garden space out here. We have our specimen tree garden and our and kind of our little retail space in front of the nursery. I pulled a handful of some of our nicest trees in each size category to go over why we call them a certain size, what's the size requirement, why do they need to kind of classify them that way? And then what are the special requirements or things to know about each size of bonsai? So this kind of goes with one of the questions that I get a lot is, can anything be a bonsai tree? Yes. And it really, really depends on the size of the tree, because you're going to be able to scale things, or at certain sizes you get certain features out of certain species, and the bigger the better, sometimes, depending on the leaf size, flowers, fruits, if it's deciduous, if it's tropical, if it's an evergreen, all these things factor into how big do you want the tree to be. And so there's a couple more things I can think of even when it comes to the trunk. My backdrop can only cover so much. I chose to cover the back of the big cypress tree for now. But even with this tree being this large, you can also see bark texture, the color of the bark, the pottery that we have to use for certain sizes. All of those things are going to come into account here whenever I give basically like the pros and cons of each size, and why we should try to aim to have a little bit of everything when it comes to bonsai in different sizes and shapes. So, okay, so let's start with the smallest. By far not the actual smallest that I've seen a bonsai, but a very common smaller size. So when I say common, these trees that I picked, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trees in the size categories that I see a lot of, and they're the easiest to classify. So there is a smaller version of bonsai even than this, but we call this Mame. So Mame means bean in Japanese. So whenever they say bean, they're referring to like a small thing, basically, just a small whatever it might be. And they use Mame in a lot of other different descriptions of things that they have in Japanese culture. So for bonsai, it just means a small, cute bonsai tree, basically. The size requirement of these trees is usually under 6 inches. So instead of doing it like that, let me do it like this, where it makes a little more sense. So I have a tape measure here. If we really want to get really nerdy about it, this tree is right at 6 inches tall. And that counts for everything. That means the leaf, where the leaves end, this leaf in theory could be trimmed back to the fruits that are forming on this. This is a mulberry. It's actually a Chinese mulberry. It fruits and flowers and it's deciduous. So in dormancy, these leaves will fall off and it will truly be in that mame size. Another thing to keep in mind with this size is that whenever we're talking about different sizes of bonsai, they also relate it to hand. So I can hold this tree with the tips of my fingers. That usually indicates that this is a mame without having to do any measurements with the measuring tape or and do anything else like that. You'll also see people doing this at bonsai shows when they're trying to qualify or classify their trees as a mame or shohin, which is the next size we'll talk about, to be awarded in that category at a show. So if they're trying to win best mame or best shohin and you see people doing that, that's because most of the time the average length between your thumb and your pinky is right at 6 inches. So it's easy to see that that tree, I mean, well, it's more like 7 to 8. My hand's a little bit longer, but this tree I know from here to there is about 6 to 7 inches or so. And then, you know, when it comes to caring for trees this small, they're very, very appealing, especially to people who want to grow bonsai in tight spaces or live in apartments or have only a balcony available to them. These types of trees, like in this size, will work. You can still grow the larger sizes in those smaller spaces, just depends on how much light you can provide and how much water you can provide. But these are popular because people assume that they can be kept indoors and they're more novelty size or fun size, when honestly it's the same exact treatment as if it were a bigger tree. It still needs water, it still needs lots of sun, but I compare it to like keeping an aquarium healthy. The smaller your aquarium, like let's say you're doing a saltwater aquarium, you have a 1 gallon saltwater aquarium. If something goes wrong in that saltwater aquarium at 1 gallon, that one thing could kill the whole tank. All of your fish will die, your coral will die, and then it'll just be a big green, nasty mess. Whereas when you get a bigger aquarium, let's say you got like a 50 gallon tank or a 100 gallon tank, then there's a lot more margin for error for things to happen whenever it's a larger thing. So this small is fun, and this tree has about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so branches that are like the key branches. On certain species, depending on how coarse their growth is, the smaller they get. I've seen mame with 2 branches, with 3 branches, because there's just not enough room to put the branches on the tree to keep it in the size and the scale that we want. So that's another thing to keep in mind. The smaller it gets doesn't mean the better. You might build a tree and it might be the fact that the trunk is the entire tree, and then you're keeping the little leaves like pinched back close to the trunk to represent branches. Just depends on the species. Mulberry like this, their leaves tend to be a little bit bigger sometimes, but they can get small and scale down nicely. And then usually one of the other things that I recommend when someone has a lot of mame or shohin is they make a, what I like to call playfully is a shohin lounge. So it's a big long tray that has holes drilled in it. So you can get plastic humidity trays, drill holes in them, and then screen it like you would do a bonsai container and put bonsai soil in that, and then nestle your shohin and mame into the soil where the feet is covered and the holes touch, and they'll be much happier there, and they'll be much easier to maintain, because when you water them, it's like you're watering a larger bonsai with little tiny pots within that tray. And then the roots will grow down into the soil, and then your trees will be happier and healthier, and maintaining their vigor and health will be easier. Now, of course, when you want to show those trees, you have to cut them away from it and and clean them up a little bit depending on the time of the year if that's appropriate to do. But there are ways to make this much easier. This tree here, normally it lives on the soil of other trees just like this, and its roots grow down into the pot wherever it's at. When it's time to move, I pick it up, I break off or cut the roots off, and then I move it somewhere else. But I usually like to call these like little buddy trees, like they just hang out under the canopies of the larger trees. So the next size is gonna be Shohin. Shohin trees are probably, if I were to say between this one and the next size up from this one, they're probably gonna be the most popular size trees just in general. Shohin is gonna be anywhere from roughly about 4 inches to 12 inches tall. That's kind of the Shohin requirement here. And I keep doing this overhanded, we can do it behind. So this tree is right at 11, it's like almost 11 inches tall from the soil to the top. Now when you have the pot is really tall, sometimes people equate the size and the shape of the pot to the overall height, because that's going to really make up the visual mass of the tree as well. This is just a typical Miyogi or informal upright, so I can use this shallower oval for this. This is a tropical willow leaf ficus. So these guys, this species in particular is very popular for this size because they're easy to maintain at this size. They, in fact, the roots on this tree didn't start this wide. They gradually grew this wide over a period of almost 10 years now. So it started out as a cutting, and then it's slowly swollen out to give us this big fat base. And then, like I had described, the growth on this tree is a little coarser than the mulberry. So I've got 1, 2, 3 branches on this tree. It's bigger, but because of the slight limitations to what I want to build this tree out, and knowing how the species grows normally, because everything on them tends to continue to swell, so the branches don't really ever stay the smaller size because the vigor in these trees is quite high. And sometimes the branches will continue to grow and grow, and it'll get fatter and fatter, and then you'll have to end up cutting a branch off or chasing them back. And with Shohin, I find that Shohin don't always stay Shohin. If you're building it for a long period of time, they can outgrow this and go up to the next size. There's an in-between size, I'll discuss that in a moment, but it's important to just kind of know the Shohin requirements real quick here. Just the Mame is fingertips, Shohin is hand or palm, single hand. So anytime that you see a Shohin, you can hold it in the palm of your hand comfortably. It's not heavy, you're not feeling like you need to hold it with 2. It's a comfortable tree. And again, just as popular, or it may be even more popular than the Mame, because Shohin, they are generally judged a lot more seriously in the bonsai scene. In the world of bonsai, a good arrangement and group of Shohin that are tight and technically sound as far as their design and the choice of species that the people that display them choose, can make them highly variable and very, very fun to get different arrangements and do different things with them. So typically with Shohin and Mame, they will be displayed in groups, and it's either 3, 5, or 7, and it can go higher than that depending on how many Shohin, and if it gets too chaotic, then less is more, honestly. I like 3 Shohin groups where there's 3 trees. So usually there's a tree up top, it's gonna be your stronger tree, then the tree on the bottom will more likely represent more of a deciduous tree or a fruiting tree, and then the tree to the side that is slightly lower will represent something like a forest planting or maybe a semi-cascade or something like that. Or if it's off to the side, there's a lot of different variations to do this. And since there's so many species, you can mix and match species. So people who are into Shohin tend to be really into Shohin. Like a friend of mine, that's what he works with professionally, is Shohin. He has hundreds of Shohin, and he could build a Shohin display, you know, do the math. You know, X times X number of trees is that number of different types of displays that he could make. Could make thousands upon thousands of different variant styles of Shohin displays. and they're displayed on I forgot the name, I don't want to say it incorrectly, but looks like a shelving kind of type thing, and they all have their own place on that shelf. So another fun size, very easy to manage. You can use the Shohin lounge if you want to. When we get to this size, the water requirements are not as extreme as the Mame, so still water every day. Smaller pots means that maybe we need more shade in the summer. Pay attention to the species you're using because you might want to dial back the water. But I think Shohin overall deserve, they definitely get what they deserve as far as their popularity. And yeah, we at the nursery here at Underhill, we sell trees in this size all day long because they're easy to pick up and say, oh, that would be a great present for whoever, significant other, loved one, because it would be easy to handle and move around. Okay, so this little beautiful tree is a Desmodium. It's also called a Vietnamese bluebell. They were popularized in Southeast Florida, and for obvious reasons, this is a great tree. It is a tropical that flowers during the summer here. This is its peak flowering. So this purple flower actually smells like grape soda. In fact, when I held it up to my nose to kind of start talking about it here, it just has this amazing aroma. And it is in the Kadamochi. So it's a two-word. It's not very commonly said. You will hear people say, bonsai people amongst groups like clubs and people who get together and study groups. You'll hear Mame, you'll hear Shohin, but there's not a lot of use of the word Kadamochi because this is kind of that generic bonsai size. This is, next to the Shohin, this is probably the most popular size of bonsai because it makes a visual impact, but it doesn't take up a lot of room. So for Kadamochi trees, a lot of flowers kind of popped off. It'll replace them easily and then make a little, it's in the pea family, so it'll make little beans, like little pea pods. It's really cute. So yeah, this size is great. The height requirements is usually, it differs a little bit here. This tree's a little bit heavier, so I have to kind of finagle it. The size requirements in this, it varies. It's somewhere from around 10 to 18. This tree is just shy of 17 inches tall. But whenever you get to this size, in my opinion, the height of the tree doesn't matter so much as to the proportions of the trunk. So this tree is in that range of 6 to 12 times the width of its trunk tall. And that's the case for just about any bonsai, to be honest. When you get to the Shohin, Mame trees, it's hard to get those proportions accurate, and sometimes they're exaggerated, sometimes grotesque proportions like 1 to 2, 2 to 4 times the width of its trunk tall. Whereas this size, it's much easier to get those proportions accurate and to get them to look right. And you get a lot of stuff here. You get a lot more trunk to show off bark, a lot more space to make negative spaces, to make movement. You get a lot more branch placement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or so main branches on this tree. There's a lot more space here to show off all these different features. And then the flowers on this tree, I mean, the whole entire tree makes flowers, so it's not a challenge to do this, but sometimes trees that have bigger flowers are shown in this size to make up for the fact that the flowers are too large for small ones. So like a wisteria, for instance, wisteria bloom could be anywhere from 8 to 12 inches long. Imagine that on a Shohin or even like a Mame, that would be ridiculous. I mean, I've seen it done before, and on Shohin for wisteria, but because they're coarse and the flower is big, you usually see them in this size and even bigger. So this is, like I said, this is probably the first place, most popular size for bonsai. I would say Shohin's second most popular, and for good reason. Like I said, makes a good visual impact. When people see this, they see it automatically and say, wow, that's a nice little bonsai. You can see it across the room, across the, across the balcony, across your garden. They don't get lost very easy. Like I have lost my Shohin and Mame amongst my collection and have been like, oh crap, I just found you. Hopefully you've been getting watered. Whereas these guys, they're easier to spot in your collection. They're easier to maintain. The system here is getting bigger and bigger. So watering them, their water requirements are even less. Still require water every day, but we're not having to like really pay attention to make sure that, if the smaller trees dry out, it's harder to catch them back up because when they dry out, they're dry. Whereas there's a lot longer drying period over time for these larger trees in the Kadamochi size here. But yeah, this tree is going to be it's desirable because at this size, it's easier to maintain and the value of the tree goes up. So that's kind of a common rule of thumb in Japan, is that the easier the tree is to maintain, the more valuable it becomes because there's less maintenance, there's less having to pay attention to things as far as like, watering is much easier to see. Like this is wet, good. I can move on about my day and, do a trim on it or put wire or whatever I need to, work on the other trees. Whereas Mame and Shohin, I'm constantly having to be like, okay, I'm looking at the soil, is that wet? Okay, now move on to the next 100 Shohin I have. Whereas usually when people have trees this size, comfortably in my opinion, still, I've seen collections with several hundred trees in this size and bigger, but in my opinion, you could have about 30 to 40 trees this size and have a great bonsai garden. So not much to complain about here. Now this is the 2-hand size. So Mame, fingertips, Shohin, palm, Kadamochi, 2 hands. And I feel, and the weight and the size of this makes me feel like I would be very comfortable holding it like this. So, not so big that it's going to be awkward or hard to move, but still big enough, like I said, to make a visual impact. And also in displays, in professional displays, such as the National Show in Rochester or the Pacific Bonsai Expo in California, this size and a little bit larger than this is usually preferred because when you put that on a display stand with an accent plant, you get a lot out of it. There's a lot more things to look at, a lot more to play with, and if you're hoping to get, a good appearance on your tree, like people will see it across the room and say, oh, that's a good looking tree because it's larger. Whereas with smaller trees, you'll see that the smaller trees are more colorful pots. This one's slightly colorful, but not nearly as bright as so the smaller the tree, the more colorful. I've seen bright yellows, bright reds on Shohin and Mame because it's like, look at me, please, because you won't see me if you don't look because I'm so small, you might pass me by. Whereas the bigger the tree, you'll see the more muted the colors become, and it's more appropriate. Like if the bald cypress right here was in a bright cherry red pot, it would just be way too much. It would be so much visual impact, and also it would take away from the tree. You don't need to be drawn to look at this tree. These trees are right in that middle zone where it's like, I can get a really nice showy pot, but also my tree can be just as showy as well, and there's a great balance in weight and visual. In the visual department here, there's just a lot of great things about this size. And I was saying how Shohin will go in between. Shohin can graduate up to this size. And let me go grab a tree just real quick since I'm talking about it and show you guys what that looks like. So this is what I mean by Shohin graduate to a slightly larger size. That's very close in height, but you notice how this has got a much larger trunk. Same species, by the way. So this is also a willow leaf ficus, and it's graduated its way up to the Kadamochi size. So would you call this that, or would it be a Shohin? I don't necessarily think so. I think these are also in their unique size range because we're starting to get a little bit more of a sumo, where we got like a really, really big trunk, but it's short and fat. And sumo trees are really fun as well. So, but when people have Shohin and their Shohin keep getting bigger, they go to a size that has been classified recently called Chuhin, Shohin I call a Texas size Shohin. So it's a small tree, but it's gotten so big that it's kind of in its own category on its own. But I've seen Shohin win Shohin awards at shows, so they're really on the edge. So just wanted you guys to see what that next size, that kind of weird in-between size looks like. Okay, so this is a Fumina juniper, Chinese garden juniper. It is right at 41 inches tall. So once we get past the Kadamochi size, we get up to what they call in Japan DAI, which would translate to the phonetics for us would be dai, or dia, not dia because there's not an A on the end, so it'd just be dai, D-A-I, or day. Some people might say it that way, but yeah, it's just a phonetic for us to follow. But I'm gonna say it's the dai size, but that doesn't sound as cool as like Shohin or Kadamochi. So I'm just gonna call this the large size, just to simplify it. It's not extra large like our bald cypress here, but is a larger size. Now we're beyond that easy to move around, showable size that the Desmodium over here is. These trees are in this size are typically used in permanent garden fixtures. So for instance, like in a public collection, like if you go to a bonsai museum, like at the National Arboretum or at the Pacific Bonsai Museum in Tacoma, Washington, there are a lot of trees in this size, because now we're past the point of, you know, I can have a bunch of these trees, or I'm trying to move it so I can bring it to a bonsai show. This tree is a permanent fixture in a bonsai garden. It's larger, doesn't need to be moved very often. It's usually worked on in place. And when you talk about visual impact, we're going more. We're going bigger size. We're using more of the material. We're making sure that the trunk and everything is the appropriate scale. This is a very tall tree. So this tree is on the edge of that 6 to 12 times the width of its trunk tall. It's definitely like closer to that 11 to 12 ratio. And it's a Fumina, so Fuminas have a tendency to be taller trees. So this particular tree too, it's similar to the tree that we did on a previous video where I worked on another Fumina. It's actually right behind me, right here in this black pot. It's just got an odd trunk. It's got a curve, like a bow in it, and it has enough character and enough feeling in it to be its own tree. So trees like this, like I said, they're fun, and every size is fun in my opinion. I love bonsai, obviously. I have everything from tiny all the way to the biggest of that, where it maxes out, where it all as well just be a tree again, and not bonsai. But this size, in my opinion, is more of like a stately size, where it's like the tree is like really in your face, big. You see it from all the way across the garden. It's gonna be either an intro tree to a garden space. In Japanese gardens, especially if you really have like a formal Japanese garden space, you'll have a door or an opening that invites you in, and then you have a big tree like this, you have a big dai sized tree like this that says, come in. It has a welcoming kind of posture to it, like this tree does. This tree has the branches that kind of come forward, and they have kind of like that, you know, welcome kind of bow kind of shape to it. So this is a great entryway bonsai. In my opinion, Fuminas, because of the history with John Naka, it was one of his favorite species to use. He was very well known for them. It has kind of more of like that important kind of feeling. So getting them a bigger size feels good. Now, this size is more challenging to move and to get materials, pots and soil, and it takes a lot more time to work on trees this large. Whereas like the Vietnamese bluebell or the willow leaf ficus, might take you like an hour or two to pick through and wire and trim, whereas this tree took me and my assistant Justin to work on. It took us 3 to 4 hours to work this tree, to design it, to wire it, to prune it. It takes me and Justin to move it. It is a 4-hand tree, so it takes 2 people to comfortably pick the tree up on either side and move it without hurting our backs. Me and Justin both have bad backs. We can't be risking that. We're too old for that now. We're not that old, but back problems are common amongst people in our age range. So yeah, if you want to have trees this size, I recommend having maybe 1 or 2. You know, this might be the biggest tree in your collection if you have a tree this size, and it's in the center or off to the side slightly as the main focal point of your bonsai garden, and everything else is kind of accented to it or points to it. There's always got to be like that. That's why these 2 guys, I position them this way. It has like kind of like a flow in a way, but they don't stay like this permanently over here at Underhill. I just did this for the video, but if you were to have this set up, they would be on individual stands, or if this bench that we're on here was longer, it would still be appropriate to have all these trees together like this. And like I said, great size, a lot more maintenance here, takes a lot more time. The price of pots in this size go up and up. So the bigger the pot, the higher the expense, the more bonsai soil, and you might be watering it less, but you're putting higher volumes of water into it. So, I mean, it takes just as long to water this tree as it does to water this tree. But this tree has a higher surface area. It will dry out slower, so water requirements are going to be less and less. But also, Fumina junipers do love water, but they're not as demanding as the bald cypress. So this tree would be, honestly, on this table, would be of the highest value of all these trees. And that's because maintenance is really easy. It's an evergreen, it's a juniper, it's a Fumina. Its styling is very nice and has a very provocative look to it. Like I said, it would be a great welcoming tree. So I would say that, like I mentioned a moment ago, 1 or 2 trees this size in your collection, great. There are other bonsai people I know that more than 50% of their collection is this size. And that just happens because we're bonsai people. We can't help ourselves. At my house, all of my trees, except for maybe 5 of them, are this size, and I have 30 trees at my house. I'm guilty of it too. So I say I only have 30 trees, but when they're all this size and larger, they take up way more space than you would assume. So like I said, really cool size of bonsai, and the scalability and everything here is so much easier to do. And in this size too, I mean, trees with larger leaves, trees with larger flowers, fruits, etc. It's easier to pull it off in this size. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room over here, or the tree that just as big as an elephant's leg, it seems like. So yes, this is a bald cypress, and we are in the land of bald cypress in Louisiana, and access to trees this big is easy for us. So, you know, that's another thing with trees this big. If you're in a certain range, and it depends on what part of the world you're in, and you have a native plant that grows very large, is very reliable as a bonsai, very easy to maintain, takes to living in a bonsai pot easily like bald cypresses do. There might be different species that you have in your part of the world that can do this, that you could find this big, pull them out of the ground, start working on them, and get them to start moving towards being a believable bonsai. So this is not the easiest thing to do. So as far as scale, you know, I would say that the Shohin and the Kadamochi are easy to create, to obtain, and to get your hands on quality materials because the tree is not nearly as large. Whereas with the dai, or the large size bonsai over there, it's a little less, it's more scarce. that you'll find quality trees even bigger, like that size over there in the Fumina. But for a tree this large, it takes a true bonsai specialist, like a bonsai nursery or nurseryman, to have something like this. You don't just stumble across this in nature normally. This has to be created from something that was found in nature by either a bonsai nurseryman or a professional. So I have to stress that. Just because you see a tree in your yard and it looks like a really big bonsai doesn't mean it is a really big bonsai. There's a lot of things that factor into what's workable and what's possible. What can we do with trees this large? So this bald cypress from the rim of the pot. Let's see if this will cooperate with me. It's too wiggly. There we go. This tree is 54, 55, somewhere around 54, 55 inches tall. So it's, if you really compare it to the size of the Fumina over there, it's not that much taller. It's about a head length taller is what we would say over here in the States, which is about a foot. And, you know, to some people, a foot really isn't that big of a distance, it feels like, but when you put height, it's kind of like it's like one of the better comparisons I think I can think of is like, you get on a ladder and you climb up like a foot off the ground and you're like, oh, that's not bad. But then you climb up like 5 feet up, you're like, I'm not gonna get hurt, but I'm kind of high up. But if you keep going, you keep adding like 6, 7 feet, you're gonna, you know, the percentage of getting hurt becomes greater the higher up you go. And it's a weird comparison, but like the taller the tree, the more things can go wrong. So like the simplicity of the larger size and the desirability kind of stops there when you get to this size. How much is a tree this size worth? This is a really hard tree to sell. That's the really honest thing about trees this size. Not everybody has a garden space that would accommodate a tree this giant. So for one, you need somewhere that this tree can thrive in a garden space that's not just like on the ground in the middle of your yard or on a table that's gonna bow in and get completely crushed by this tree, because this tree has gotten to a point where we call this the Imperial size. Imperial comes from the kind of terminology in China when you would have a tree that sits in the middle of a courtyard or a palace courtyard and is in the middle of the courtyard. It is, when you walk in there, the person who owns that place wants you to be impressed. They want you to say, oh my God, that thing is big. Like, that's a big bonsai tree. That's what they want you to say. They want you to be impressed. So this is just the size to kind of wow people. They can still be technically sound. There are really, really great trees in this size, and I've seen a lot of really showy, technical giants. Of course, the more wood, the more branching, the more movement, the more different details, the bigger it gets, the more details you can add, the harder it's going to be to find quality material this large. For instance, like a juniper, an old like collected juniper with twisted deadwood and live veins that kind of loops back and forth. We have the one that that Guy and Carmen, Guy Guidry and Carmen Leskovinsky worked on. That has a very big, twisty deadwood and live vein trunk. It's a large tree, but the entire tree has high quality features throughout the entire thing. There's points of interest on the entire plant. So that's difficult to find. Sometimes you might have a giant trunk and then the rest of the tree doesn't really match what's going on with the trunk or the top. Whereas like a tree like this style it's kind of teetering back and forth between a formal upright and an informal, because it has a little bit of a slant to it. So this would kind of be like a slanting style in a way. But bald cypresses are commonly shown in this style here because one, we come from the land of giant trees and the influence of Guy Guidry is obviously here. And two, bald cypresses look great with these big towering, powerful trunks because they are associated with big groves of old growth bald cypresses to look old. Very, very similar to the coastal redwood or sequoias. When you see those in bonsai collections, when someone has a coastal redwood or sequoia in their, if they live in California, they have a big tree because they want you to know that it is a big tree. That's kind of how it kind of equates to here. So can every species of bonsai fall into this category of this big? No, not every tree can get this big and look like this. Now, yeah, the willow leaf and the desmodium, they can reach these sizes, but here in the States, in Southeast Louisiana, I would have to import that from South Asia in order to get a trunk that large, and then the price for me goes way up. Now, I would want to, in order to have a tree that large of one of these species, I would want to have the need for one. I would personally want to have one. Would I be able to resell it? It would be very difficult to resell it, honestly. But tropicals that big do have their place, and people do like large trees. So will you ever find one this size like this in a willow leaf? I've seen them. Actually, we have a couple of larger willow leaves in the back. They're not nearly this big, but I have seen them. Will you find big desmodiums? They're gonna go exponentially way more up in price because imagine this, that big with flowers all over it. I think it would be a little crazy to see something this big with that many flowers on it. It would be so bright and so eye-drawing. I would like something a little more subtle in my garden personally. And I like, you know, this tree to be big and then that one to be smaller and to be a nice accent because they point at each other and it looks nice. So it just really it depends. Do you want a giant tree with really showy features, or do you want a giant tree with subtle and more of a serious kind of feel to it? And bald cypresses have that kind of daunting, brooding kind of feel to them when they're big like this. They have that, you know, I'm the big tree in the forest kind of feel. And that is why we have trees this large sometimes. The price of pottery and the amount of soil, everything multiplies in value here. I mean, this pot by itself is close to $1,000 just on the pot by itself. You have to equate the tree, the training, the styling, the age, everything else in there. The value just keeps going up. But like I said, it would take a very special person, a very special garden, and a very special situation to even be able to move this tree. This tree gets moved by a forklift. You could move it with 4 people and make it an 8-hand tree, but 4 people on this works, but it's kind of one of those situations where if one person lets go of it, things could get really out of control really fast. This tree can crush people. So, you know, do you want a tree this large in your yard? Yeah, that would be really cool. I have one tree that is close to this size, not nearly, well, I have an American hornbeam that is actually, I think, 10% smaller. And, you know, the size of the pot and the overall size of the tree. Can I move the tree? Not really. I have to call in help from friends of mine to even move it, rotate it. In fact, right now that tree's sitting in my garden, it needs to be turned so the sunlight hits it on the other side. It's so big, the canopy is so large, it's starting to kind of lose density in the leaves over there. I have to wait till a good friend of mine who I can convince to come to the house to help me move that tree will actually want to do it. It's not like, hey man, do you want to come help me move my giant trees around? Not everyone's thrilled to do that. So keep that in mind. If you want to get trees this large. If you were to have one in your collection, I recommend having one. Because if you had multiples of these, I would call you insane, but I do bonsai, so if I saw a collection with multiple trees in the imperial size like this, I would still understand. So, but yeah, like I said, another fun size, not a bite-sized tree for sure. Definitely more advanced, giant. But when it comes to all the sizes of bonsai, kind of wrap this up, it's all the same. So it doesn't matter if the tree is, 6 inches tall or 55 inches tall. It's the same type of practice. It's in a pot where we are completely responsible for maintenance, for pruning, watering, fertilizing. Everything's the same, It's just the size of the tree is different. That's the main thing to take away from this. So doesn't matter what size you want your tree to be. That's completely up to you. It's subjective to what species you like, what size you want, and what's your budget. We had at the early end of this, I mean, at the beginning of this, I answered some questions someone asked about a budget. If you took cuttings, you could make trees like this all day long from cuttings. And if you let them grow out, then you can get to this size. And then if you waited 5 to 10 years, depending on the vigor of the plant that you're growing, you could get to that size. And then 10 years, 20 years later, you could get to this size. This would take obviously way longer. And this tree was collected from the swamps. It was already very much this size. So anyway, I hope this has been very informative and helps you guys kind of go through and think about different sizes of bonsai and the size classifications matter and help us determine on how to judge and how to go about these trees. And how many of them should we have in our collection? As many as you want. So just keep that in mind and have really good friends that can help you move your giant trees. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like more, please let me know in the comments below. Tell me which size of bonsai is your favorite. Tell me how many big trees or small trees do you have in your own collection, or what are your goals? Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. It really, really helps the algorithm. Go over to any listening platform where you enjoy your podcast shows and listen to my show, Little Things for Bonsai People with Carmen Leskovinsky. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.